Gelser, founder of FreeLand. We're here at the ballroom of Town Square in Green Lake, Wisconsin. This is also our hometown and hometown for FreeLand. Today we have a very special guest who's going to join us in a conversation. If you're on Facebook, feel free to chat, send us any questions or comments you've got, and we've got an audience, a live audience here. Please put your hand up. So I want to welcome in Dylan Jennings. Is no stranger to Green Lake or the Green Lake Film Festival. Dylan Bishkinis Jennings is a member of the Martin clan. He graduated from the University of Wisconsin-Madison with degrees in anthropology, archaeology, environmental studies, and American Indian studies. Jennings served 2 consecutive terms as an elected tribal council member for the Bad River Band. Dylan, welcome back. Can you hear us okay? We need audio on Dylan. Okay.
Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2.
Yay. We gotcha. Okay. We can hear you, Dylan.
All right.
Welcome. And we've got a lot of people here who remember you, so you're in very friendly company. But we're hoping a lot more people who've never seen or heard you joining us by Facebook today can come to appreciate what you've got to share with us today. Dylan has joined the other film festivals and has been a huge added value to our learning process about nature conservation. And this year in our End Pandemics Campaign Alliance, I invited him to join one of our weekly Zoom meetings, which people from all over the world join in, including my mother from Marquezan and Evelyn too. And he just gave this incredible perspective on the pandemic. So I asked him if he could come back. Dylan's got a new child from just last week, so understandably could not travel all the way down here. Congratulations again, by the way, on your new baby. Wonderful. But he is going to speak to us on the environment and the pandemic, one Ojibwe's perspective. Dylan, over to you. Let's have a discussion about what do you mean by that? What can you share with us today about the pandemic?
Miigwech, Steve, Aninga Kinawia, Nitsa Bija Keens, Indigenous Cause, Wabish Chashi and Dodem, Mushkas Deebing and Dunjaba. Miigwech Wainem, a Kinegoginoa, Gapi Jaegomo, Sonongom, Bindashka, Weni go, yo osa, and Miquinamongo, Egyo, Manido, Yajigoma, Weni Gush, Weni Dash, yo osa, and Miquinamongo, Egyo. Oasia, Gaigo Benesia, Gaigo Giguya, Rejuena Maurigu, and Shinabe Waking. Niwajaganashi Bungi. So, in our beautiful descriptive language, I just told you all of the secrets that you need to know about Ojibwe perspectives on the pandemic, and I hope you guys have a great day. Miigwech. Thank you. I'm just kidding, I'm just shy. In our language, I just introduced myself. I'm Bija Keens, or Dylan Jennings. I'm coming to look to you live from the Bad River Band, Lake Superior and Nishnabeg in northern Wisconsin. So in the background here, this isn't like a fake screensaver. That's our corn, our garden. Our yard way back there yet is in Nishnabeg, Gitchaguming, Lake Superior. And very beautiful day, very humbled and honored to be spending a little time with you all. And I cannot wait until I can come back to Green Lake and be in person with you all. We made some really good friends and relatives there in that community, and just looking forward to rekindling some of those relationships. And so I just want to make a note that as we talk about some of these things that are culturally relevant and important to us as Anishinaabe and as communities in general, I always make a point to let people know that I'm not an elder. I don't even consider myself to be an expert or a knowledge holder of any sorts. I'm just sharing some things that were shared and taught to me and passed down over the years and through our generations. And so I don't mean to be speaking to you on behalf of any of our tribal nations or be any kind of authoritative person or expert on anything. But I will share with you some of the things that I was taught and some of the things that I paid close attention to as an environmentalist, as somebody that spends a lot of time outdoors and a lot of time practicing our language and our culture and our way of life. And so in many of our indigenous stories, we understand that there are really critical junctures in our existence. Um, and what's important to note is that the notion of time is a cultural construct that we all see differently within each respective community and culture. And so we understand that in our Ojibwe, some of our Ojibwe stories and perspectives, there were times in our communities of great sickness. And specifically in many of our Ojibwe creation stories, we hear that there were times when some of the original people forgot some of their teachings, forgot their moral and spiritual obligations, and forgot how to coexist with everything in creation. And it was during those times that we saw severe consequences. Some of those stories in our language talk about at one point a large flood coming through our area and wiping the earth of just about everything in existence. Our story transitions to that great flood, wiped out nearly everything. And it's basically said that in that story that one original being, one that we refer to in our language, and sometimes we don't talk about this being in without the presence of snow, but this particular being, the survivor, along with the help of some of the Awasiag. In our language, we say Awasiag. Can you guys say that? Awasiag. I have no way of hearing you or knowing whether you're saying it or not, so I hope you guys are saying
Awasian.
it. All right, awesome. And so the Awasiang or the Awasiag are the ones, I guess the rough, crude translation is animals, right? The ones that are here on this earth with us. And those other orders of creation, they helped the original man to restore what we call Turtle Island today. They actually talk about different ones trying to swim down to the bottom of this huge reservoir where the flood had come through and try to find a little bit of land to come back up and carry it to the top. And was actually many, many different Oasiag that tried to do that and couldn't because it was too deep. And finally, it was, in our language, we call him Wajash, or the muskrat. He's the one that actually gave his life so that the original man could make Earth and make what we call Turtle Island today on the back of Mikanak, or turtle. And so early on within our stories, we understand that animals or Wasiag have a really prominent and important place within our survivalship, right? And we understand that they're at the epicenter of why we're still here, not just as Anishinaabe people or Ojibwe people, but as everybody in every piece and walk of creation. And so within that story, the Great Flood, that Wajash, that little muskrat, was the one that kind of gave its life so that everybody could survive and we could start anew. And essentially that story transitions into a time now where that earth base or that land base begins to grow on the back of that great big turtle that's part of that story. And that the winds that come around here swirl, they say, and there's this just amazing power that could be felt for miles. And that land base began to expand. And that land base is now what we call North America, right? Turtle Island. If you look at that, that's why a lot of our languages, a lot of our communities reference these places that we live as Turtle Island. And when you actually look at it on a map too, it's really interesting because it kind of looks or resembles that. And so within our stories, that those relationships are perpetuated early on through what happens next. Some of the next part of our story talks about a time when we walked this earth with our relative Mayingan. In our language, we say Mayingan. We might refer to him in English as wolf or wolf. So the wolves are wolf, the original wolf, Mayingan, walks the earth with that original man. And together they name everything in creation. They assign everything a name based on its traits, based on how it sounds, based on all these different things. And they give everything a name, give everything a name to which they already have a purpose. And so at some point those two separate, and within our traditional structure as communities, our traditional governance is actually led by our clan system. In our language, we say Indudemananik. And so that original clan system, the heads of those clans, or the icons or symbols of each and every one of those clans, is an Oasiag, or is an animal, right? We have our bear clan, the ones that are responsible for kind of policing and taking care of our community, also in charge of working with some of our medicines. We have some of our bird clans, which are leadership clans. We had internal leadership clans and external leadership clans. Um, you have our Wabashashi, our Martin clan, which was kind of the warrior society or strategists. Um, our Giguyag, our fish clan, the ones that are kind of like scholars and philosophers, work with our communities, and also work with teaching some of our young people. And so you have all these different clan systems that emulate those original relationships that we have with all the different animals in creation. And so I think a big part of this story, a big piece of this to understand, is that we're survivors of that, and it's also a testament to how pitiful we are as human beings. At one point, we absolutely needed everything else to survive, to get through those difficult times. And so part of those original stories talk about a point in time when every other order of creation decided to stand up and take charge to help take care of us. And so there's stories about how the deer stood up and said, "You don't have anything to eat. We will give ourselves to you so that you can survive when you need us. Our meat, our hides, our bones for tools, all of those things," right? And the same with some of the different species and subspecies of fish. The same with the plants. Different plants had given themselves up to us for different things, different ailments, different sicknesses and whatnot. And so it was up to us as some of the original people to remember those relationships that were grounded in the notion of reciprocity, right? So never taking too much, never succumbing to that greed spirit, um, never forgetting to share, and never forgetting to give back. Those are some of the very important principles, and always remembering to harvest in a respectful manner. Those are all very important teachings that we try to continue to live by even to this day. And so, like I said, within our perspective, within our worldview, nature or just the Wasiag, the animals that we're talking about, aren't just aren't just something that we are disconnected from. They are our relatives, and I can't say that enough. They are, in our language, you saying Dinaway Maganuk, they are our relatives, and they're not something to be treated as a lesser, or as something that needs to be dominated, or hunted or killed or anything by that matter for non-subsistence purposes. That's kind of what some of our teachings talk about. And so, one thing we're always taught is to remember that those original relationships, those original sacrifices, and to remember those obligations, those moral, spiritual obligations that we have to the Oasiag, to everything in creation, and remembering our place within this larger system of life. Um, and so I think we really wanted to kind of turn this into a dialogue between Steve and I, where we'll be kind of asking questions, and we'll kind of dive more into more of this. But I think that the big part of understanding these stories is that they're very old stories, but they're very much relevant to today, right? Where a lot can be weaned from these teachings, and we need to, especially in regards to what's going on nationally, internationally with the pandemic. Um, there's a lot of important teachings and we can revive, and that we can adhere to. I also want to say that when the pandemic first kind of hit and it became a reality here in our area and our region, a lot of our community members began taking to some of our elders, some of our knowledge holders, and asking about this. Like what does this mean? And one important thing that I'll never forget is, it was brought up by one of our elders talking about how important it is more than ever to utilize our medicines, to utilize our indigenous ways of knowing, our perspectives, our understandings of life, and put them into practice, to live by those, not just talk about them, but to live by them. And that's in how we treat each other with respect, and that's how we treat every other order of creation, and we treat them with respect as well, and to remember those original teachings and our original understanding, because we know that when we abuse those things and we veer too far away from our cultural teachings, there can be and there are consequences, like we've seen. So I'll stop there, and we can kind of dive into some things here. Miigwech.
Thank you, Dylan. Amazing as always. Really appreciate you joining us today. I've written down quite a bit here just to kind of go back over some of the points you made, and I've got a couple questions I've got, but at any point, anybody in the audience or watching us on Facebook, put your hand up, chat in, and we will get your remark or question in. First of all, I think, Dylan, as I understand it right now, you're studying to get your PhD as well. We didn't mention that at the beginning. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm working on my dissertation now within the Nelson Institute at UW-Madison. So shout out to the Nelson Institute.
Okay, impressive. So we've covered a number of points here. The fact that there are stories going back in time about sickness due to, perhaps a unbalanced behavior, forgot the teaching of coexisting, and that led to certain sickness. We also talked about the oasia, the different animals, and how each of them, basically in a clan structure, has a specific role for the greater community. So, and also we talked about basically subsistence versus, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically making sure that one does not over-harvest. By the way, as Dylan knows, in our campaign, End Pandemics, we're calling for an end to commercial trade in wild animals. That does not include or affect subsistence hunting for the reasons that he's been discussing here now. And basically to remember to share and give back, and that you're treating the animals not as lower beings or separate, but as actual relatives. So I think this is all very powerful stuff, and I guess my question is we're campaigning to try to wake the world up to the fact that we're going to have more pandemics and even worse ones if we don't change our relationship with nature, and that we're looking for nature-based solutions. And what I'm hearing from you is you're like, well, yeah, that's something that you all have been thinking about for a long time, and just trying to figure out how can we communicate that in a way that the wider world gets excited and understands. As I mentioned last night in our opening, for the opening night, we talked about the One Health concept. This is kind of the technical concept that is coming out of the WHO and the UN, basically protecting animals, people, and ecosystems all at the same time because they are connected. Kind of hearing the same thing from you. I just want to know, since you've got this indigenous wisdom that you're passing on, at the same time you're at the University of Wisconsin-Madison getting a PhD, obviously rubbing elbows with all kinds of types. What do you think of the One Health concept, or how would you describe what it is that, in a nutshell, what we're trying to achieve here? How would you try to communicate that to a wider audience?
Yeah, I think your point is really well taken about just a lot of our indigenous communities kind of already having some of that roadmap fleshed out within our history and our understanding, and I can't stress that enough. If if you're looking to try and identify, what can be done, or how, potentially, least consequential or least impactful ways of living, our indigenous communities are often paving the way and continuing to kind of lead those models. And I gotta say this, we, um, one of our relatives out west, he's a Lakota physician, gave this presentation, and he talks about this in his presentation. I've heard this said a couple different times, but like the brief history of medicine, especially in the United States or just around the globe. Can I share that with you guys really quickly?
Yep. Yes.
The brief history of medicine goes like this: 2000 BC, here, eat this root. 1000 AD, that root is heathen. Here, say this prayer. 1800 AD, that prayer is superstitious. Drink this potion. 1900 AD, that potion is actually snake oil. Here, swallow this pill. 1950 AD, that pill is ineffective. Take this antibiotic. 2000 AD, that antibiotic is artificial. Here, eat this root. Right? we go. I can't take credit for that. Like I said, that's from one of our relatives out west. Or he's a Lakota physician. But that's the real truth, right? If you look at the history of medicine and how things have gone, right? Many of our communities, our tribal communities, especially our indigenous communities, have known, with this intimate connection that we have with the environment, have known what beings are there for us to use for ailments, for sicknesses, for whatever the things for protection, whatever it is that we needed. And over time, colonization and kind of mainstream forces have kind of led to, either the compromising of those indigenous knowledge systems, or even just just the erosion of those systems. And so nowadays, though, you see more and more physicians, more and more people kind of waking up to just the notion that, well, wow, actually these systems might have a point here, right? These traditional knowledge systems actually might work, right? Or actually provide some ground for understanding health, right? Because oftentimes we've only understood health as as a physical entity, right? When really it's emotional, spiritual, it's mental, it's all of those things combined. In our language, I don't know that we have a word that kind of separates or distinguishes all of those different components of health. In our language, we'd also talk about minobimatazewin, which literally is like overall health, like your well-being, which is all of those components or facets. And so I just bring that up because as we think about moving forward, I think a lot of our communities out there have pretty good models for good ways to kind of coexist with everything, good ways to perceive and understand things. I'm not saying that everybody has to, do everything or exactly the way that our tribal nations are, or indigenous knowledge systems say. But exploring those things and kind of understanding, through a different lens, what health means to them and what and how they perceive their place in this world in general. If that makes sense.
Thank you. Excellent. Yeah. So my wife is from India, and I understand, by the way, you speak some Hindi. I don't know how that happened, but did you study that, or?
Yeah, well, I actually, I did my undergrad and my master's and now my PhD all at UW-Madison, and I got put into a first-year interest group, which is a FIG. That's what they call it at UW-Madison, which combines, an area of study with two other related areas of study, and so we were actually studying that region, the history, the music, and then there was a Hindi language course that I took, and I liked it so much I ended up taking multiple semesters, and such a beautiful language, beautiful people in general.
Wonderful. Okay, interesting. So I was just going to say, I mean, sometimes I feel like I have these kind of, eureka moments, epiphanies about philosophy or even health, and only for my wife to say, oh, you know, that's something that we discovered 2,000 years ago or has been written in the Mahabharata or whatever. And I'm just like, okay. In fact, we kind of are going in cycles and repackaging things. So let's see, what did I want to ask you here? Well, yeah, I mean, basically, it sounds like the answers are right around us if we're willing to listen, especially to people like yourself. My question to you is, what are your future plans? Where are you heading with this PhD, and what's Dylan Jennings' future look like?
Oh, geez, you know, I think if my community and our, you know, family would let me, I think I'd just love to spend the rest of my life up here in the woods and not not have to work with too many people and just kind of do our own thing. But you know, I kind of get asked to do a number of things, and one thing we've noticed, you know, as a former tribal leader and somebody that is a big advocate for our environment and the protection of our environment, is that people have a very difficult and unique time listening to you unless you have those letters in front of your name. And I've experienced that many times, whether that's out in Washington, D.C., trying to advocate for Clean Water Act or higher water quality standards, you know, or whether that's, you know, working with the local county board, you know, here within our region on, you know, why air quality is so important, or why PFAS is kind of a scary thing to find in our water systems and in our smelt populations, right? There's a number of reasons why, but you know, so a big part for me was, you know, we don't have a lot of people within our Indigenous communities that you know have obtained those types of credentials. You know, there are increasing numbers of Indigenous community members that are working towards that. It's a big movement, right? And I think it only helps our cause, our communities, and helps to have more people in that realm advocating. You know, I also think that a big part of what we've worked on up here in our community over the last 5-10 years has been revitalizing our language, because a lot of this knowledge that we're talking about is embedded or unlocked with our language. And so if we don't have our language, we risk losing a lot of that knowledge. Many times some of our elders, our first language speakers across our Ojibwe communities will only share certain knowledge if it's in the language. And so, or maybe they only know names of certain plants or certain beings in the language. And so if you don't know those things, right, you lose all there is to know about those things. And so so for us, it's very much about decolonizing. And I recognize I say that while I'm trying to obtain a you know, Western perspective and Western degree in a colonized system, right? But you know, when I decided to go back to grad school, I was very upfront with the Nelson Institute that I want to do something that's going to help my community, right? Not something that's going to end up on a shelf that gets read or doesn't get read. That doesn't bother me. I want to do something that's going to help our community and help to revitalize our traditional ecological knowledge. So whatever's next is, you know, that's what I've got on my mind.
Very good. I have another question here. While we go over this question, just a note to the folks back in the control room. I know there's a couple images that you sent down. We could flash some of those up too. But while we're doing that, I have a question to you. We had a panel today about regenerative agriculture. And there's a lot of discussion here about, you know, proper use of soil. And we're learning so much from some of the budding regen projects around Green Lake. And today, facilitated by Tom Eddy, who you've met before, there was, you know, people brought in who are experts on this agroecological approaches in Africa and Southeast Asia. But I know, you know, a couple years ago when you were here, right out here on the lawn here of Town Square, you guys were demonstrating to us how you harvest a certain kind of rice. And I think you're still active in that and eating it or whatever. Can you tell us more about that? Basically, talk about
Yeah.
food.
Yeah. So that was one of the big things that I was a big proponent for. Um, the the governor and his office called me up a couple years ago, and they asked if I'd serve on the governor's task force on climate change here for the state of Wisconsin. And I was like, sure, I think that's that sounds like a good thing. And I was a little hesitant at first, I got to say. I was like, I don't want to be a part of something that, you know, doesn't make any movement or strides, or isn't able to do anything, from what gridlock or whatever else you want to call it. And they said, no, this is going to be something where we're actually going to implement some of these recommendations. And so we got to really work with a lot of agricultural experts and people in that realm, and just really, really amazing, great people, and learning about different types of no-till practices, different types of different forms of agricultural mechanisms to sequester carbon, to reduce the amount of application of things like fertilizers, and create safer water table conditions, right? And one of the areas that I also found myself I've always been so interested in is just the notion of food sovereignty, and some of the recommendations within that big book of recommendations that came out. We really pushed hard, and that was the notion of food sovereignty, right? We were reading statistics, and we were being briefed on statistics that talked about, the population estimates in 2050, reaching multiple billions of people, right? And you look at those numbers, and you just think, how are our current agricultural systems, or even our mom and pop farms, going to keep up with that? Right? How is that even possible? A lot of them are struggling as is, right? And no matter how many different types of strategies we look into it, as far as agriculture is concerned, what I took away from that was people need to grow their own food, right? People need to get back to understanding their food systems, right? There's no reason why our children should, and this isn't true for all children, right? My kids know where their food comes from, but there are kids that grow up and they think that green beans come from a package or a can, right? And no, they need to know that this is how food is grown, and this is why it's important. And so throughout the last few years, we've spent a lot of time trying to educate people about our traditional food systems, about the importance of them, and about why people should get involved, right? It isn't something that you should just gawk at and look at. It's something that you should definitely get involved in. And I'm talking to everybody in the audience. If you've got a little garden, like, kudos to you. Let's double it in size next year, right? Let's keep the momentum going, and that's kind of what we do in our community. And wild rice, manoomin, is a very important staple in our community as well. We're actually kind of just wrapping up our wild ricing season. This time of the year is actually called Manoominake Gizis, or the ricing moon. And so it's that time of the year where we're spending a lot of time harvesting, processing, consuming, and utilizing that manoomin, and practicing those things that we do this time of the year. And it's a really great, powerful subsistence being that has just helped our people to survive and thrive for hundreds and thousands of years. So if you've never had real wild rice, I really, really encourage you to support some of our local producers, our tribal producers. Try some of that out. Usually you cannot get it from stores, so really have a keen eye for what's available, right? And be a smart consumer about that, because sometimes you might in kind of the cross genetic realm that is not actually wild rice. It's actually paddy cultivated too.
Right.
So real wild rice grows in streams, reservoirs, lakes, rivers in the northern part of these states, and used to grow all throughout the state and throughout our present day region. Um, Due to climatic factors and a lot of other things, and a lot of anthropogenic factors, it tends to only grow in central to northern parts of Wisconsin. But if you have the opportunity to harvest, which any Wisconsin citizen or even in Minnesota, you can get a license through the state and go harvest some and take part in that. It's a really great experience. A lot of work, but a really great experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I love. Anybody have any comments? Feel free to butt in anytime. I'll notice your hand up. Oh, good. Marcella, I'll repeat your question. Just go ahead and.
Strengthen our immune system.
Yep.
Considering we're.
Yep, good, great question. Very pertinent to the the film festival theme this year. Dylan, what kind of foods would you recommend are good for our immune systems?
Immune system. Great question. So early on in the pandemic, a lot of our communities were, it was really cool to see this on social media and all over the place, but using some of our original medicines to kind of keep their houses and their dwellings safe. Some of my people in my circle or friends, distant relatives that contracted COVID early on also, used a lot of these medicines to help them get over the sickness. And so one thing you cannot take for granted is all the cedar that we have available to us in the state here and in our region. Cedar is a very powerful medicine that helps cleanse and clean us, and can make a really powerful, strong tea that can keep our systems strong. I know a lot of people are starting to catch on to this, but in our language we have this being that we call Sukkatagan, and what we kind of recognize that is chaga, and so that's an actual fungal entity that grows on a lot of our wigwas or our birch trees, and that's another very important and strong immuno boosting resource that we have. Manumin, wild rice, is also does that for us. Keeps our bodies strong. You can also see behind me, we grow different types of corn, different types of flint corns that can be ground into like a corn flour, and make all sorts of different types of things. Sweet corn, we eat a lot of that too. Anything from our garden, they say, is just like, helps your immune system. And there's something about when you grow your own food, and I don't know if anyone's ever had this experience, but my wife and I, we try to do this more and more, is we try to see how many days out of the week we can go and have a full meal each day, full meal with something, with everything from that meal, something that we harvested or helped to produce. And so, for instance, the other night we had wild rice, which we harvested and processed, with venison steaks that we harvested, with cranberries that we harvested, and with what else did we have? With veggies from the garden, right? And we try to do that as much as possible, not only just as a fun, friendly challenge, but because we know that we feel really good, our kids get more energy, we get more energy as parents when we're eating these foods, right? And I don't know if there's got to be some kind of a study out there about it, but you seriously do feel that energy of those animals that you harvest. You feel those energies from those animals when you eat those, or from the garden. You feel that life, versus when maybe you get more disconnected from it. Let's say if you're getting it from somewhere else. Not to say that it's a bad thing, but there's just something about it. So any of those types of things, teas. A lot of people grow tea gardens. Teas are really great and fantastic for helping your immune system. I will say though that if you're an active hunter or harvester, forager, whatever you want to call it, the exercise and the even the intellectual work that you put into identification and getting to some of these places is also immune boosting as well, right? We bust our butts this time of the year harvesting wild rice and out there sweating. It's a constant motion activity, and then even processing it, it's a lot of work. But man, it feels good to be doing that kind of work.
Yeah, well, that sounds great. Growing and harvesting your own food obviously has environmental benefits, can make you healthier. And whenever I think about it, not that I do have a garden in my backyard, but also it can reduce stress. I mean, we're all working our butts off to make enough money to feed ourselves and our family. But if we can actually literally grow and harvest our own food, that kind of can reduce that stress as well. I saw another hand in the back there. Yes, Brian.
About the coronavirus pandemic, I'm curious on, we all know it depends about the vaccination, on your politics and geography and your age. What is his feeling about the community around him? What's the feeling about getting the vaccination?
Right, okay. Yeah, and why do I combine that? We're coming to the close here pretty soon, but the question, Dylan, is, how are things going on up there with the COVID-19 situation? I guess we could ask, what's the levels of transmission, and what's the feeling, I guess, about the vaccination? I know you can't speak for everybody, but what's the general situation there? Thanks.
That's a great question. I was rounding my last term on tribal council. I kind of decided I wasn't gonna run again and kind of get back into grad school when the pandemic hit, and so I kind of had to be on the leadership team for our community, which we've got about 10,000 tribal members in our community. Not all of them live here on reservation, obviously, or in the area, but we represent 10,000 people. And so that was probably one of the most difficult things I've ever done in my young life, was being in a leadership position during the pandemic, because people are scared. People are concerned and worried for their families, for their children, for our elders. And we recognized early on that we're extremely susceptible to disease and other types of impacts as tribal nations. We have some of the highest diabetes rates per capita in the United States. Like, it's crazy disproportionate health data that kind of describes our tribal nations. And so we're already very compromised as is, and so it was very concerning, scary to our community members. And so early on, I can always remember this. An elder pulled me aside and said, we shouldn't fear this, because they say that fearing something gives that thing power. And so what we do is we respect it. We don't need to taunt it or anything like that, but we will respect it, and we will practice our way of life and keep doing what we're doing, and practice it in a cautious way. And but we should not be scared. And so I always remember that. And I can remember us sitting in a meeting, and we were examining our numbers, and thank goodness so far, throughout the last year and a half, our numbers have been comparatively low, compared to our area. But, we as a tribal nation have the ability to kind of set our own standards, to make our own laws and practices. Whereas I know, like in the state, it's been a struggle to do that. In some states, in some regions, it's been a struggle to make mask mandates or to make other types of mandates. And so we were able to do those types of things, no problem, keep some of our businesses shut down. But, even with all that, it still wasn't enough. We lost a couple of really, really great, remarkable elders in our community here. one of my teachers, Mr. Joe Rose, kind of still struggling with that. He passed as a result of COVID, and was a huge influence all over the country to a lot of people, and and across Ojibwe country too. We lost a lot of fluent speakers as well. A lot of like I talked about, where a lot of that knowledge comes from. Lost a lot of those ones as well. And so it's been a very tough year on a lot of our communities, and just like any other community, our community is extremely social, and so not being able to socialize as much as we normally do, and our ceremonies that we have are very social. So, sometimes those things were either canceled or postponed, and so I know that was difficult. People use those ceremonies and some of our ceremonies and our practices and our socialization events as a means of renewal and decompression, and when those things aren't available, that can be tough on all sorts of all sorts of facets of well-being. So right now with the Delta variant, I think we've saw a couple cases here in our community, but I think we're hopeful that just kind of passes and we don't get any spikes. As far as vaccines go, early on, I think we had a really good run in people getting vaccinated. I honestly don't know where our community is at right now, but I do know that historically, you look at Native communities. I mean, there's I guess built-in distrust, for our government and even for our health entities that that serve our communities. I mean, for crying out loud, it was just, I want to say maybe in the 70s, don't quote me on this, that some of our IHS providers, Indian Health Services, clinics or hospitals in some of our regions here were actually sterilizing Native women. Some of our Native women would go into what they thought was some other type of procedure or surgery, and they'd leave the hospital sterilized, and another form of trying to eradicate our communities. And so when you have the government and health entities doing that within our recent history, I mean, it's no wonder you see distrust in things like this, right? And there's a lot more examples of where that distrust and where that trauma comes from, but that was just one example I wanted to use to make a point that some of our communities, I would imagine, have lower vaccination rates, and or at least people were question it. I think that's probably I would share so far.
Right. Thanks for sharing that, and our best wishes to you and the whole community there. I know Wisconsin is, has been hit kind of relatively hard on this pandemic. So, but good to hear that folks are banding together and you're able to do things as a tighter community, perhaps. We could see.
There is some national data out there, I think, about how some tribal communities are actually doing better than the national average on vaccination. So if you type in that in your search engine, you should be able to find some of that information.
Interesting. Any other comments or questions? We're going to be closing pretty soon. We do have one over on the left. I'm sorry, it's dark in here.
One of the communities that he referred to is the Blackfeet. The scouts on the Blackfeet Reservation as part of the trip to Glacier National Park this summer. 98% of the Blackfeet have been vaccinated.
The
Blackfeet Nation.
Right. We were just getting a comment from a crowd, and I think that one of the Blackfeeted nation, that 98% of them were actually vaccinated. So that just bolsters what you were saying a moment ago.
Yep.
Good. Well, and I really want to just say again, we appreciate your comments on food, and I think that's been a big part of this film festival, the panels and the movies. We're going to have a few more later, is how people grow our food. And I appreciate your comment about, getting closer to it, growing it, harvesting it, rather than being disconnected. I live out in Bangkok, and we have to buy it from a supermarket. And even if it's marked organic, I think half the times it's really sprayed with pesticides, and it's expensive, and you just work a lot to buy it. And it's nice to come home here to Green Lake and walk down the block to the farmer's market every Friday and have that available in addition to whatever I might buy at Webster's or someplace. So, but it sounds like you're taking things to another level up there. Well,
yeah, that's if the tech group can kind of share those two images I had really quick, that kind of speaks to what I'm talking about. Is these are just some quick clips from a newspaper that used to be published up here in the early 1900s, like 1905 to like 1915. And essentially what it was is a page. There's a whole page in this newspaper of different types of tonics and medicines that are, being advertised. I don't know if they can put those up or not.
Yes, we're looking at them.
Yeah, right. So one's Doan's kidney pills, right? And there's another one as well, and they're supposed to be to address certain ailments, right? And it's just an example, just a small, minute example of kind of the attempts to not only assimilate many of our communities, but to replace our traditional plant knowledge and systems and medicinal systems with what are perceived as more better alternatives or mainstream medicines, right? And it's kind of funny because actually that Doan's kidney pills, if you ever do any research on that, there's a couple other types of medicine like that back in the day that were either sheer placebos or that actually contain potassium nitrate, which if you know anything about potassium nitrate, and like explosives and fertilizers and other things. And so, it's just a small example of, kind of history and in what I talk about, a decolonization, right? And our ability to question things in the media, question things that are kind of thrown at us, right? To kind of be able to see things for what they are. And so that's what I would impart everyone with is, decolonize through, recognizing that the systems we operate in sometimes aren't the best, and we need to break free from some of those understandings and grow your own food.
Good. Thanks, Dylan. And before you go, I think you'd appreciate, I'll let the audience know what's next, literally in like the next minute or two. We're going to show a short film here. It's called The Return. It's about 16 minutes long, got great reviews. And after that, we're going to have a discussion with some National Geographic explorers, one who's here and one who will beam in to us from Brazil. And the name of the movie is called The Return. It's a family in the Ecuadorian Amazon seeking refuge from COVID-19 in the jungle, leading to a reconnection with their ancestors and nature. As lockdowns end, will the family stay? I think she knows the answer already. So, Dylan, thank you very much. Everybody give a big round of applause.
Miigwech, thank you all. Rewani, Gigawabaman. I wish you guys all well. And Gigawabaman in our language, we don't have a word for goodbye, so we use Gigawabaman. And literally what that means is, we'll see you later or until our paths cross again. So, Miigwech, thank you all.
See you later, Dylan. Thank you.